Good evening, friends. Good afternoon, good morning, good day, wherever you all are. So wonderful to see you here on our screens in our virtual house of study. I'm in Jerusalem, which seems appropriate for tonight's topic. And from Seattle to Arizona to Northampton to snowy New York and Florida and beyond. Welcome, friends. Really nice to see you all. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us as the moderator par excellence, making sure all the tech is working well. So grateful. And this is the second of our 12 sessions, 12 monthly sessions. Judaism, born divided. How do we get here? History and the making of meaning. I'm really honored and grateful that you're all here as supporters, as fellow travelers, as wise ones on this journey together. As we begin the next hour of learning together and then another 30 or so minutes of just questions and probing, I invite us to really bring ourselves into this collective experience of learning, wherever you are right now in the world, whatever you're in the middle of, whatever you left on a Sunday to prioritize this. Thank you for prioritizing this. And as more people are joining us, let's take a moment to really ground ourselves just in being. Find a way to find your body's presence, maybe with your feet in the ground, maybe paying attention to your tush on the seat, maybe closing our eyes, stretching, breathing. Hmm. Grateful for the privilege of learning safely, warmly, curiously. Few more deep, present breaths of being. Amen. On the Jewish calendar, we're in the month of Adar, which reminds us to try and find joy even when life seems tough. The Muslim calendar, the holy month of Ramadan, has begun, and Muslim neighbors here in Jerusalem and elsewhere just broke their fast a little bit ago. In the Christian world, when the season of Lent, the lunar year just began for many of our friends from the East. The entire world these days is immersed in some notion of sacred intention. So I'm delighted that we are all here finding the path to how we do really live in more oneness and unity, knowing that all around us, that does not seem to be the order of the day. This course, for those of you who are already in the previous session or have already read and joined, is really the product of the 929 chapters of the Hebrew Bible. Many of us read together for 3.5 years. And that rose within me the curiosity about the narrative of the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south, Judah versus Israel, two different ideologies that are at the heart of how the Hebraic Judaic people arose, how the Bible was written, and how, if you are identified as Jewish at this moment, that is actually the innards, the inner workings of who we are. One people, maybe two or more. The division from the earlier days of North versus South, Israel versus Judah, as depicted in the Bible and some historical text, is going to be our journey. And the aim is not just to be students of history per se and hang out in the footnotes of biblical literature, but ask ourselves the question of mapping how we got to a place where at this moment the polarization in the world and in the Jewish world is so wide and widening. How are the different ideologies, from Zionist to diasporist, from Orthodox to progressive, from traditional and highly untraditional, what are the roots? What is the origin stories? How do we get here? How do we honor the differences and dignity of differences? And how does discord not become a disaster? We're going to get to the politics, but only in the past. This is not a time to discuss our hurting hearts at this moment with what's happening in the United States between different political ideologies, what's happening in Israel, in Palestine, all over the world. But the echoes of our modern day will enter our echo chamber as we begin in the past and make our way session by session into who and how we are now. We're going to have a study sheet that is going to help ground us in textual origins. Unlike some of the teachings I will be offering this year and I offer usually, we're not going to break into breakout rooms. I'm going to really take the next hour or so with some time for sometimes for interaction to be teaching these different texts and walk us through the sequence. And then we're going to devote the last 30 minutes for questions. So write them down. And whatever we won't get into today, we can clearly get to later. This is an exploration, an experiment, a lab, and I'm very grateful that you're doing so with me. If you're watching this with me right now, live, thank you for being part of the inner circle that is supporting this generously and in it to learn deeper. If you're watching this later, thank you for being part of the circle and being part of the learning. And I'm sure we all find our way into making the most of this material for our own personal and our collective liberation, learning, and growth. So let's start at the very beginning. Source number one on our sheets. Tonight's title is Whip You with Scorpions. Was it an inflated ego and a bad tax policy that split the United Kingdom? I'm not talking about Britain. That's a whole other story we won't get into right now. And was there even a united Jewish kingdom to begin with? We will begin to explore that. So source number one on your sheets, and thank you, Taylor, for sharing in the chat the link to our source sheet, which is on the web page of the landing page for this course, where you can see the curriculum for each of the sessions as they come along. We've added the source sheet, and we're going to add more materials as they come. I hope you've had a moment to look at that landing page and increase and enrich your presence, your learning. And in any way, we're going to begin with tonight's source sheet. One more word of disclaimer. If this becomes too much history, too much biblical, like, shh, we're learning this together. Take a deep breath. I remember being in class and feeling like, I don't get what's going on. It's too much information. Shh. I think we'll be okay. And I'm hoping to cram a lot of it and still find a way to breathe and process what this is all about. Some of us are seasoned learners of Jewish history and Jewish biblical experience, and some of us are not. We're all going to meet on the same page. So welcome to being here. For those of us who can be with us with your screens on, that'll be wonderful. If not, that's okay. But I'm just glad that we're all here together. So let's start. Source number one from an online site that I discovered in my exploration called The Secret Israel, the Split Kingdom. The division of the unified kingdom of Israel into the northern and southern kingdoms brought about distinct cultural and religious differences between the two regions. These differences were shaped by their geographical location, political leadership, international relations, and religious practices. The division of Israel into northern and southern kingdoms remains a significant event in the history of the ancient Near East. It marked a turning point in the religious, political, and social landscape of the Israelites. The lasting legacy of this split kingdom highlights the complexities of this era, where power struggles and ideological differences, such as the difference between idolatry and monotheism, were commonplace. While much remains unknown about the precise events leading up to the division, scholars continue to study this period and uncover new insights. Nonetheless, the split kingdom serves as a potent reminder that change is a constant in the story of humanity, and that understanding our past lays the foundation for a better future. That's really the main line I want us to take from this little nugget here. Understanding where we come from helps us create a better future. And in our past is the split kingdom of North and South. Judah in the south, Israel in the north, 12 tribes divided, starting sometimes around the 10th century BCE or so, going all the way to the 6th, 7th century or so, two parallel narratives. How did it start? What is it all about? We're going to begin in just a moment, actually making sense of it historically. But I'm going to go right into source number two. Okay, we started off this evening with a musical piece from a TV show that is now on Amazon Prime. I am not endorsing it. This is not an endorsement. It's now season 2 of The House of David, created by the same people who gave you The Chosen, heavy Christian agenda. And according to the Christian mythology, Jesus is the descendant of David, and therefore the messianic role of Jesus is connected to the messianic title that the House of David has received at some point. Now, the House of David is obviously important in the Bible. King David is of supreme importance. And the agenda of the Bible elevates David and the House of David to this uber important messianic, God's chosen, the only legitimate dynasty. But the deeper we read the Bible and the more we read it with a critical eye and trying to understand the different narratives there, we actually question whether the House of David was and is the only legitimate dynasty, religious narrative, and way to depict the history and the ideology of the Jewish people. David is from the south, from the house of David, the tribe of Judah, the kingdom of Judah. He is its first king, but he's not the first king of the kingdom, nor is he the only one. So I grew up, like many of us, with David, and here I am in Jerusalem that celebrates the Davidic legacy, but actually there's much more to it. So we're going to unpack that and look right at source number 2. Source number 2 is a protest, is a slogan, right? We're living at a moment where many of us are either in the streets or supporting those in the streets who are protesting tyranny and autocracy, injustice, and worse. Seems to have been the case as far back as David himself. This is a quote from the book of Chronicles. It is the last book of the Hebrew Bible, likely written by the scribes who were from the kingdom of the south, from Jerusalem, from the house of David, with an agenda to prioritize the southern narrative at the expense of the northern narrative. What they're describing here is the moment after the split of the southern and northern kingdoms. We're going to look at this moment in great depth. You'll understand the context. But I want you to hear the slogan that is embedded in the biblical text. Even if it was written by the winners, they had to include the slogan of their opponents because it's a really old slogan and it must have teeth and memory. So this particular moment is when the people of Israel, and Israel, as we'll see, is a big word here for different kind of identities. But let's say those people of Israel, of the kingdom, saw that the king had not listened to them. This king is David's grandson, Rehoboam. We'll get to him in a moment. And the people proclaimed, this is a chant, מה לנו חלק בדוד, לא נחלה בבן ישי. You can hear them singing it. We want nothing to do with David. We got no share in Jesse's son. Everyone to your tents. Ish le'olecha Israel. People go home. We're out of here. Now look to your own house, O David. We're done. This is not a chant that shows up first in David's grandson's life. This shows up first in David's life. It's an obscure moment when King David is dealing with a coup started by, at least according to the story, his own son, Absalom. And there's a moment there where it feels like the country is at war, at civil war, which it was, and this chant shows up there for the first time. The Bible is giving us a hint that the civil war between the South and the North, David and his opponents, doesn't begin with David's grandson. It begins with David. There's already these layers of discord, of South versus North, of the centrist versus the universal, the local versus the global, different kinds of being human in the world. So I want you to hear the slogan, what it means for the people of Israel to say, we want nothing to do with King David. We're our own people. And this is an old, old schism. That's where we are beginning. Hear those voices of our dissenting ancestors that even the David Bible writers had to acknowledge. And let's, having started there, go back. I'm taking you to source number 3. And source number 3 is introducing archaeology. Because as biblical readers, we might be saying this is God's truth that many people on the planet still think, whether they're Orthodox Jews or evangelical Christians, people who think the Bible is as is. But we are also the students of modern scholarship, where literary criticism, grammar, archaeology allow us to understand more than what the Bible is about and what this history is about. Source number 3 is about a really important archaeologist, Flinders Petrie, who discovered several important finds, and one of them is a game changer. It is the very first time outside of the Bible that the word Israel, is discovered, showing us that there was a reality where some of this is backed by facts. I want to read this. This comes from a book that many of you have heard me reference before. Jacob Wright, who's a professor of biblical studies in Emory in Atlanta, wrote this fantastic book, Why Did the Bible Begin? And this is a good place to start. Where does Israel first show up? And was it a kingdom? Was it part of a kingdom? Was it a people? How did we get here? Before it was a land, before it was a state, before it was a nation, what is it? Source number 3. The starting point in our historical reconstructions should be the inscription of Merneftach from 1207 BCE. Okay, we're way before David. In 1896, the celebrated British archaeologist Flinders Petrie made the most sensational discovery of his long and celebrated career. Excavating at Thebes, an ancient Egyptian capital on the Nile's west bank, Petrie's team discovered a temple that the pharaoh Merneftach, 1213 to 1203, had built. Among the ruins, they found not only this ruler's earliest statue, but also an inscribed black granite monument standing over 10 feet high. We know that at this time, a population called Israel, was living in Canaan, this piece of land. While we cannot be sure what this population included and what territories they occupied, we can be confident that their members would not have thought of themselves as the later biblical narrative depicts them, namely as the 12 sons, the 12 tribes descending from Jacob's 12 sons. Most would have been identified solely with their own families, clans, regions, and towns without ever thinking in terms of a larger political community. This is really early Bronze Age. At this early stage, the name Israel appears to have designated a powerful tribe or even an alliance of tribes that posed a threat to the Egyptian armies. Its members may have been semi-nomadic outsiders who lived on the periphery of cities and urban civilization in Canaan. Thanks to this Merneftach stele, we know that the name long antedates the emergence of the Northern Kingdom in the 10th and 9th century. We can also be confident that those who bore the name in Merneftach's time possessed some political significance. Otherwise, the Egyptian scribes would not have deemed their subjugation worthy of mention. The name lived on and assumed new meanings as groups joined the fold. However, had it not been for kings who centuries later used Israel to designate the diverse regions and populations that they consolidated and ruled, the name likely would have been long forgotten. So if you look at the photo here, you're seeing that there's this one word in the hieroglyphics, which is Israel is wasted. Its seed is not. Clearly wrong. But the first time that Israel is mentioned in world history, it's when a king, the Egyptian king that ruled the region, claims its demise. Important for us as rightists to understand that this thing called Israel evolved from a bunch of tribes, a bunch of locals in the Canaanite lands and highlands that really connected Mesopotamia and Egypt. Something emerged over time. We are now going to fast forward from the 12th century and 13th century BC, 300 years, to when our story actually talks about Israel as a kingdom. Again, this is not necessarily historiography, but that is the biblical historiography. So fast forward with me, and I hope you're keeping track. Source number 4. Okay, we were in Egypt, ruling Canaan, the 1200s. At some point, this thing called the Israelites comes together, the 12 tribes. Maybe they come out of Egypt and cross the desert, and Joshua divides the territories. There's no evidence of that. Maybe they then start demanding some kind of sovereignty. King Saul of Benjamin, one of the tribes, becomes the king, and he is overtaken by David from the tribe of Judah. The south overtakes the north. We're going to look at that story in a couple of sessions. But for now, the story as we know it is that King David rules for quite a long time, consolidates the kingdom into a prosperous ones, but then his son Solomon takes over. And King Solomon is the one who is really to him attributed the building of the empire, the building of the temple in Jerusalem, first time, Yahweh's temple, the palaces, the major commerce from south to north, with a huge deal of human labor and taxation on those so-called 12 tribes, the Confederacy. So here's a verse from the book of Kings. King Solomon was now king over all Israel. The word Israel here is interesting, right? We know that it has different kind of histories. Solomon had 12 prefects governing all Israel, 12 tribes, 12 provinces, who provided food for the king and his household. Each had to provide food for 1 month in the year. Interesting taxation system. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands of the sea. They ate and drank and were content. Hallelujah. And here's a lovely illustration of Solomon's famous throne with multiple lions, gold, silver, and everybody bowing to him. This is propaganda. Was Judah and Israel two different names for population? Pay attention. It's not synonymous. Super happy and content? Probably not. They were under major taxation, major labor to build those edifices of Solomon. And there's one fact that is not in this verse. We're going to see a text about it in the moment. One of the tribes did not pay monthly taxes and did not feed the king once a month. Guess which tribe? If I'm from the tribe of Judah, and that is my base, and that is my source of power, who am I going to exempt from taxes? You've guessed it, tribe of Judah. And if you're from the tribe of Benjamin or Dan or Naphtali or Zebulun, how would you feel about that? Living all the way in the north, in the fertile, rich north, supplying the king in Judah and Jerusalem with all of your goodness, all of your young men, your young women, your wealth. Well, his tribe does not. Does that seem to you like reason for social unrest? Well, Solomon's reign, from all we know, was not one that tolerated a great deal of dissent. But something happens after. Okay? So I want to read one more quote with you, and then we're going to stop for a couple of minutes. Source number 5, now that we've talked about how we got Solomon and the so-called happy kingdom, this is from Amotz Asael, whose book in Hebrew, The Jewish March of Folly, describes all the terrible decisions leaders, monarchs, and rulers in our history have made all the way through, pretty much now. He writes about Solomon the following: the kingdom of Solomon is etched in Jewish memory as an ideal, a singular moment in which peace and justice, serenity, prosperity, and global harmony descended upon Israel and its land. It was a time in which the borders were quiet, the government wise, the land vast. Judah and Israel were as abundant as the sand on the seashore, eating, drinking, and joyful. The verse we just saw. Happy days, utopia. They were dwelling safely, each under the vine and fig, from Dan to Beersheba, surrounded by the new Middle East, where export makes its way to Africa, Yemen, India, through the new port of Etzion Gever, while imports make their way into the Mediterranean, thanks to the covenant signed by the wisest of men, King Solomon, with Hiram, the king of Tyre. Amazing, the new Middle East. Except that the historical facts behind these lofty descriptions are vague. He's being kind. The kingdom of Solomon is not mentioned in any historical sources other than the Bible. The glorious era is even in contrast to what is later described in the biblical book of Chronicles, where there's a description of a war that Solomon waged. So between what the Bible is telling us and what reality may have been, there is a gap, which is what I'm trying to show you. Our job is to pay attention to what's between the lines, what the Bible isn't telling us, the hidden story, the repressed story, what the propaganda doesn't want us to hear. I'm going to use a terrible projection anachronistic example here, but if you're going to want to watch the news today, it matters whether you're going to watch Fox or the BBC. Right? You're going to get a different kind of coverage of what's going on. The Bible was written with an agenda. It's not exactly Fox. It's not exactly BBC either, right? There's an agenda to what's being written here. But we're going to find more, despite and including the agenda, how the kingdom of Solomon split. We're going to go to the death of Solomon and the third king of Israel, under whose reign the kingdom split, according to the official story. We're going to read a biblical text together. It's 9:30. We're just on in Israel. I think we're just on time. So if you haven't read Bible in a while, welcome back to the Bible. We're in the book of Kings. We are in the description of really the king after king and battle after battle that describes most of the book of Kings. And there's a rebellion that is both told and hidden. We're going to start right on the top. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, this is source number 6 on your sheets. You can follow the Hebrew or the English. And after this, I'll take a short break to hear from you. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from the tribe of Ephraim, the north, Joseph's son, this is all northern territory, of Tzeredah, was the son of a widow whose name was Tzeruah, was in Solomon's service. He raised his hand against the king. That's a sign of rebellion. The circumstances under which he raised his hand against the king were as follows. Solomon built the Millo and repaired the breach of the city of his father David. Solomon expanded the real estate tremendously. The man Jeroboam was very capable. And when Solomon saw that the young man was a productive worker, he appointed him over all of the forced labor of the house of Jacob. Listen to the term, house of Joseph. Forced labor of the house of Joseph. Joseph is the big tribe of the north. His children, Ephraim, Manasseh, was the entire territory of the very wealthy and fertile north. But now the house of Joseph is forced labor for Solomon of Judah to build the empire. During that time, Jeroboam, who now becomes the overseer of his people, during that time, Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem one day. And the prophet Achiah of Shiloh, Shiloh is in the north, we don't know much about this prophet, meets him on the highway. He had on a new robe as somebody working for the king. And when the two were alone in the open country, Achiah took hold of the new robe that Jeroboam was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Take 10 pieces, he said to Jeroboam, for thus said the eternal Yahweh, the God of Israel, I'm about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands, and I will give you 10 tribes. But one tribe shall remain his, for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For they have forsaken me, says God. They have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Phoenicians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, Milcom, the god of the Ammonites. They have not walked in my ways. They have not done what is pleasing to me or kept my laws and rules as Solomon's father David did. However, I will not take the entire kingdom away from him, but I will keep him as ruler as long as he lives for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose and who kept my commandments and my laws. But I will take the kingship out of the hands of his son and give it to you, the 10 tribes, Jeroboam. To his son, and he doesn't say which of Solomon's son, I will give one tribe, so that there may be a lamp for my servant David forever before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to establish my name. But you have been chosen by me. Reign wherever you wish, and you shall be king over Israel. If you heed all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight, keeping my laws and commandments as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and I will build for you a lasting dynasty as I did for David. I hereby give Israel to you, and I will chastise David's descendants for that sin, though not forever. God, hold on. Sorry, folks. Am I having was there a glitch in the Wi-Fi? Was I glitching? A little bit. Okay, good. That was maybe Yahweh being mad at me, but that's okay. We got this. Right? David's descendants, but not forever. Solomon seeks to kill Jeroboam. He promptly flees to the king of Egypt and remains in Egypt until the death of Solomon. You get the drama? Oh my God, there is a coup against Solomon by his own tax collector who's in charge of the biggest territory of wealth. Solomon now dies. What happens next? Da-da-da. Cliffhanger. I'm going to pause here and I'm going to invite us for a couple of questions, curiosities. Is there anything that's really puzzling to you? Is anything that's really weird to you? I'm sure there was a lot of it and we don't have time. I apologize ahead of time. So I'm really just asking for one or two major clarification questions that you want to understand before we continue. And no, I'm asking you to curb your enthusiasm. It is cruel, but we will have a half hour in a bit. Questions, observations, something that's really pressing before we continue. Feel free to unmute and ask it. Okay, Ken, you jumped in first.
Thank you, Rabbi Amichai. This is really fascinating. I'm just a little bit confused by the psukim, the verses that mention Yodei is displeased with Shlomo, or he wants to maintain his dynasty in the south, because I get the impression that he was favoring David's devotion, but I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening with Yehuda in relation to the north. And I'm sorry that I don't understand.
No, you're Ken, thank you. You're 100% getting it. It is confusing. Number one, remember this text is written by the South. This text
Sure.
needs to say, how did we get here? How did the magnificent, majestic kingship of David and Solomon within one generation split? We got to blame someone, right? So we can't blame David. He's above blame. But something happened around Solomon's reign. He had many wives, he worshipped many gods, he walked away from the old way, greed, etc. But we still have to make it so that the house of David and the house of Judah has merit and has continuity and has respect. Yahweh wants the house of David. But The house of
Hmm.
David also screwed up. So you're beginning to read into the lines here the confusion. The text wants us to be
Yeah.
loyal to David, but it admits, kind of, sort of, that something went wrong, right? The prophet, according to
Okay.
the story, is tearing the cloak of Jeroboam into 12, saying the north will now take over because there was the lack of religious piety. Historians
Hmm.
will tell you something else. That's not what happened. The North was simply furious at the South. They were there before. They were much bigger. They were the majority. They didn't want this upstart from the South taking over and taking their money and their children into slave labor. So this is a
Right.
Southern text telling us a story about a schism from a very particular point of view. And if it's confusing,
Right.
I agree. We're reading against the grain of what the text wants us to know.
Right. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Elizabeth, I'm seeing you. And then we're going to go back to our text. Please.
So I'm wondering about the validity or whether this so-called um, the person he meets along the way is not a prophet in the prophet section of the Hebrew Bible. It's like a nobody is on the road and suddenly meets Jeroboam and says, "I'm speaking for God," and look at what he's telling him to do and expect what's going to happen, like almost instigating this rebellion and setting him up. So I'm wondering. I know you said we don't know much about him, or if anything, but I don't recall if it's common in because I did read the Bible with you. But I don't recall if it's common that there's suddenly a prophet that you've never heard of before who has
Yeah.
some
Heard.
large role, or
Yes.
whether it's
Yes.
a it's like Jeroboam's made up the story in order to justify his actions later.
Correct. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great question. We don't know much Achia Shiloni. He doesn't show up, but he is mentioned in the story. So he has a significant role, right? Pundits or prophets, journalists, artists have a role that's larger than life, impacting public opinion, right? How the hell did Tucker Carlson become to be who he is, right? So Achia, the Shilonite, might have been real, may have been not. Whose agenda is it to tell the story that this guy comes up and says, I will split the kingdom? Jeroboam is going to get the larger part, but it's not because Jeroboam is awesome. It's because Solomon is corrupt. Someone has an agenda here. That's more interesting. So whether this prophet is real or not, whether he was important or not, he's used as a decoy in the story to explain to us what the authors of the Bible wanted us to know, that this kingdom split because of the corruption of the rulers. Whoever he was, that's the story. That's what we got. He shows up both in Kings and in Chronicles. So whether it's real or not, that's the narrative that we inherited. Our job is to, again, read between the lines, which we will do in just a moment. Okay, so thank you both. I'm sure there's more questions. We'll get to them. Okay, so here's the historical moment of the cliffhanger. Jeroboam, who began a rebellion against King Solomon, fled to Egypt where he's protected. There's more to that story because the king of Egypt protects him while the king of Egypt's daughter is married to Solomon. That's interesting. There's more about that. But very Game of Thrones. King Solomon dies. There's a huge competition which of his many sons from many wives from different political entities and alliances gets to inherit. Never mind exactly why Rehoboam becomes the king, but there he is. He's the son of one of the many queens with a particular political alliance that makes the most sense. But he messes up. So rather than read the text about Rehoboam's messing up in the actual Bible, I'm choosing to read. We're going to talk about source number 7 in a moment. Go right to source number 8, where one of the most exciting texts about this moment was written by Barbara Tuchman, who wrote The March of Folly, about folly in political decisions all through the 20th century. She begins with the story of Solomon's son. I just want to say that source number 7 is from another great book by a friend of mine, Alex Israel, who lives here outside Jerusalem. And he's actually highlighting for us that one of the reasons that this rebellion was so important was because of the crushing tax burden, and that the epicenter of the revolt was the tribes of Joseph, Jeroboam, because the house of Judah was absolved of taxes, which the Bible kind of says but doesn't focus on, right? What are you talking about? If the king's own tribe isn't paying, then that is a glaring call for some kind of revolution, which is what we're seeing here. So that's source number 7, but we're going to read source number 8, okay? In her fantastic short writing. Rehoboam, king of Israel, son of King Solomon, succeeded his father at the age of 41 in approximately 930 BC. Without loss of time, the new king committed the act of folly that was to divide his nation and lose forever its 10 northern tribes, collectively called Israel. Among them were many who were disaffected by heavy taxation in the form of forced labor imposed under King Solomon, and had already in his reign made an effort to secede, right? We just read about that. They had gathered around one of Solomon's generals, Jeroboam, a mighty man of valor, who undertook to lead them into revolt upon a prophecy that he would inherit rule of the 10 tribes afterwards. The Lord, Yahweh, speaking through the voice of a certain Achia the Shilonite, played a part in this affair, but his role then and later is obscure and seems to have been inserted by narrators who felt the Almighty's hand had to be present. Acknowledged king without question by the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, Rehoboam, clearly aware of unrest in Israel, traveled at once to Shechem, that will be Nablus, center of the north, to obtain the people's allegiance. He was met instead by a delegation of Israel's representatives who demanded that he lighten the heavy yoke of labor put upon them by his father, and said that if he did so, they would serve him as loyal subjects. Among the delegates was Jeroboam, who had hurriedly been sent from his forced exile in Egypt as soon as King Solomon died, and whose presence must certainly have warned Rehoboam that he faced a critical situation. Temporizing, Rehoboam asked the delegation to depart and return after 3 days for his reply. Meanwhile, he consulted with his old men of his father's council, the elders, who advised him wisely to accede to the people's demand, and told him that if he would act graciously and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. With the first sensation of sovereignty heating his blood, Rehoboam found this advice too tame and turned to the young men that had grown up with him, his base, the other young men, right? He's 40 years old. They knew his disposition, and like counselors of any time who wished to consolidate their position in the Oval Office, gave advice they knew would be palatable. He should make no concessions, but tell the people outright that his rule would not be lighter, but heavier than his father's. They composed for him the famous words that could be any despot's slogan. 3 days later, he spoke to them in accordance with the advice of the children, the young people, and said, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father flogged you with whips, but I will flog you with scorpions." What does the pinky have to do this? You're looking at the illustration here on the left from Basel, Hans Holbein, the younger. What next? Rehoboam is going to say, "My little pinky is thicker than my father's thigh." You don't think he's talking about a pinky or about a thigh. You know what I'm talking about. And this was depicted several times as a way to talk about power structures. Delighted with this ferocious formula, Rehoboam faced the delegation when it returned on the 3rd day and addressed them roughly, word for word as the young man had suggested, that his subject might not be prepared to accept this reply meekly seems not to have occurred to him beforehand. Not without reason, he earned in Hebrew history the resignation ample in folly. Instantly, so instantly as to suggest that they had previously decided upon the course of action in case of a negative reply, the men of Israel announced their secession from the house of David with a battle cry we already met tonight, the famous battle cry of resistance to David. To your tents, O Israel, see to your own house, David, we are done. Rehoboam took the most provocative action possible in the circumstances, calling upon the very man who represented the hated yoke, Adoram, the commander or overseas of the forced labor tribute for the entire kingdom. He ordered him, apparently without providing supporting forces, to establish his authority. The people weren't having it. The people stoned Adoram, the tax collector, to death, upon which the rash and foolish king speedily summoned his chariot and fled to Jerusalem, where he summoned all the warriors of Judah and Benjamin to reunite the nation. To no avail. At the same time, the people of Israel appointed Jeroboam their king. He reigned for 22 years and Rehoboam for 17, and there was war between them all their days. The protracted struggle weakened both states, encouraged the vassal lands conquered by David east of the Jordan, Moab, Edom, Ammon, and others to regain their independence, and opened the way to invasion by Egypt. The 12 tribes were never reunited. Torn by their conflict, the two states could not maintain the proud empire established by David and Solomon, which had extended from northern Syria to the borders of Egypt, with dominion over international caravan routes and access to foreign trade. Reduced and divided, they were less able to withstand aggression by their neighbors. The alternative course that Rehoboam might have taken, advised by the elders and so lightly rejected, exacted a long revenge that had left its mark for 2,800 years. That's the March of Folly. So if you're looking at source number 9, you're seeing again the verse we began this evening with. The people's protest. We want nothing with David, nothing with this corrupt royal house, split. And indeed, Rehoboam ruled the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Some say Shimon, Simon, for a while unclear. And this text, Chronicles, says, look at the last line, and Israel has been in revolt against the house of David to this day. That's when this text is being written, as a testament to the lasting feud between these two ideologies. Now, whether there was a United Kingdom split into two, or that too is a story, we're going to look at some other time. But I want you to understand that when we're talking about Judah and Israel, this is the official story of how the kingdom split into two. One king, bad advice, hubris, power, instead of humility, compassion, and a little wiser strategy. Look with me on page 9 at this chart of the kings of Israel and Judah. Right? If you are fasting forward, we can do it on the screen, but I'm sure you have it in front of you. So you're going to see on the top King Saul, we're going to come to him, King David and King Solomon, the first 3 kings of what maybe was some kind of a united kingdom. But for sure, from the moment Solomon's son dies, Rehoboam, you see him there on the left, we're in 930 to 913, the kingdom divides. And then Jeroboam becomes the first king of Israel. And if you go down this line, you're seeing one royal house on the left. The house of David was consistent, centralized in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the kings of Israel kept shifting their dynasties, a lot of coups. But all the way to the end, Israel gets destroyed by Assyria in 722 BCE. Judah survives 150 years more, destroyed by Babylon. There's no more house of David, no more house of Israel by the time Babylon conquers all. So that is how we begin. How do we get there? Different questions. If you're looking briefly with me, and we're almost done, at source number 10, this is again an archaeologist Israel Finkelstein from The Forgotten Kingdom, another important book to help us make sense of what may have happened here and how the Bible is only one part of the story. History tells us more. I want to read this source with him, and then we're going to end with a poem. Take a breath, and then we have time for questions. Finkelstein writes the following. In the first half of the 8th century BCE, Israel ruled over the lion's share of the territory of the two Hebrew kingdoms, and its population accounted for 3/4 of the people of Israel and Judah combined. Right? 8th century BCE, we were just about half a century earlier. Israel was stronger than Judah, both militarily and economically. And in the first half of the 9th century and in the first half of the 8th century, almost half the time the two kingdoms coexisted, Israel dominated the southern kingdom. Nonetheless, Israel has lingered in the shadow of Judah, both in the story told in the Hebrew Bible and in the attention paid to it by modern scholarship. The history of ancient Israel in the Hebrew Bible was written by Judahite authors in Jerusalem, the capital of the southern kingdom, and the hub of the Davidic dynasty. As such, it transmits Judahite ideas regarding territory, kingship, temple, cult, and how we got here. The situation is amplified by the fact that biblical, archaeological, and historical studies of ancient Israel have been dominated by the Judeo-Christian historical tradition, which has been shaped, in turn, by the Hebrew Bible, that is, the Judahite text. In other words, we're reading the story from the skewed perspective, from the agenda of one side of the story. The Bible is what it is, and hence biblical scholarship basically deals with Judah and with Judahite perspective of Israel, which was formulated a century after the collapse of the Northern Kingdom. Archaeological research somewhat balances this picture. Iron Age Judah has been thoroughly studied. Jerusalem is one of the most excavated cities in the world, especially over the last 50 years. And almost all the major sites in its countryside have been excavated. Mitzpah, Hebron in the highlands, Lachish and Beit Shemesh in the Shephelah, Beersheba and Arad in the Beersheba Valley. Israel has not been deprived of investigation. Samaria, the capital, has been thoroughly excavated twice in the past, and all major countryside sites have also been explored. It is field research, then, that enables one to write an archaeology-based, Judahite ideology-free history of Israel. And in the end, also to teach a more balanced reconstruction of the history of ancient Israel in general and the two Hebrew kingdoms in particular. This is the introduction to Finkelstein's book, where examining the archaeological ruins shows us a lot about what is the deeper layer of the story that the Bible isn't telling us. That it wasn't just the corruption of the south, of Judah and the Solomon, that created the split between south and north. That these ideological differences were older, were deeper, were financial, were religious, were ideological, were cultural. And even though the Bible tells us that the United Kingdom was split into two because of one king's hubris, it is possible that that was never the case, that there were always two kingdoms, that there was always the north and the south, that the name Israel goes back centuries as a bunch of tribes that kind of made their way into some kind of a confederacy, some kind of a shared alliance. But really, it was one tribe that took over at some point, the tribe of Judah. And it's this one tribe's ideology, with Jerusalem as the center, with one God and one place and one fierce religious ideology, that then creates or tries to create a total kingdom, but to no avail. The resistance was there from the very beginning. And we're hearing it from that slogan, "To your tents, Israel." We want nothing to do with David and the fact that David's grandson, believe it or not, splits the kingdom into two. Whether the history is as the Bible tells us or as the archaeologists, Rehovam's folly The whipping with scorpions is the official moment in which the kingdom splits into two. And from now on, we have North and South, Judah and Israel, civil war, sometimes cold, sometimes hot, two different religious dynasties, religious evolutions. And it's that enmity and that dialogue that is responsible for the birth of the Bible and what eventually the Jewish people will be. My argument is that that schism isn't over. When we are today facing the deep divides between Jews whose perspective is that it's a land for Jews and the Jewish blood is more important than the blood of others, that it has to be Jerusalem as the only center of Jewish life, that the diaspora is illegitimate, that to be a Jew of anything other than strict Orthodox law is illegitimate. We're looking at Judah versus Israel, limited versus expansive, tribal versus global, particular versus universal. And it starts both with Judah and Israel, North and South, and the fact that our holy book was written by one of the ideologies, belittling the other. Well, what if that story is much more complicated than that? What if we are products of two very different voices whose distinct ideology matters? And we need to honor these different narratives, but challenge the status quo or the mainline narrative because it deprives us of a deeper sense of being in the world. So, even though according to tradition, I am a descendant of King David, I hereby say, I'm not sure I'm so crazy about this dynasty. Whoever wrote the Bible gave us an amazing legacy for which I'm grateful, but also left within it the hints, the landmines, the breadcrumbs that are leading us to really question the authority, the autonomy, the ultimate truth of this narrative. Something here is calling us to go deeper and to ask questions. And that's what this journey is about. I'm going to end with a poem from Yehuda Amichai, one of my favorite poets who lived here just a few blocks away from where I am in Jerusalem. And he writes about the place where it isn't righteousness that will help us, but love. From the place where we are right now, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a plow, a mole, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. With this, my friend, thank you for joining me for session number 2 of our 12 sessions, Judaism Born Divided. We're going to meet again on March 22nd, just before Passover, with a story of the last Passover, a political parable about the limits of liberation and a very strange Passover that happened in Jerusalem in our own history. Thank you for joining me for this first hour. I'm going to take a breath. And you're invited to stay on for 30 minutes of questions and answers. If you're watching this after this live recording, stick around. We'll see what shows up. And if you need to go, that's fine. Stay tuned to getting the study sheet and this recording in your inbox later this week with more highlights, with more articles, and another reflection in the next couple of weeks as well. Your questions, your thoughts, your reflections via email or via the Substack app are very welcome and encouraged. And thank you again for your generous support in making this journey possible. Good night for those of you leaving us, and hello to those of you sticking around. And we're going to take a moment just to breathe, ground, stretch, and then we'll start with questions. I'm curious, what is on your minds? Okay, take a few seconds and we'll begin. Okay, Harriet, you get to go first. And then Daniel, and then Ken, then Roxanne. Awesome. Hi, Harriet, where are you coming in from?
Pacifica, California.
Okay, beautiful place.
Um, I I was really struck when you said that Judaism was born in diversity and difference from tribal identity. And I'm thinking maybe that wasn't an accident, but that led to our view of humanity, that it's no accident that we think a human being is a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Hatov, and that to function, you need to be in balance, that both are essential and required for human existence. I mean, thinking of all the midrashim that talk about trying to eliminate the Yetzer Hara, and it ends up that no one gets out of bed. Um,
Would you mind translating? Because not everybody knows the Hebrew terminology. When you
ah,
say,
a,
like,
a
what do you mean
tendency
by that?
towards the dark, the Ra,
Mhm.
and a tendency towards the good, and that we make conscious decisions at every moment that is a balance between these two aspects of a human being. And,
Beautiful. Thank
and,
you.
and there have been some wonderful stories of rabbis in villages that have prayed because there was too much adultery for God to eliminate the Yetzer Hara, the tendency to the dark, and God acedes, and the next morning no one gets out of bed. So it's pretty clear that we need both. And and I'm wondering if it's not an accident that although the Torah is written from the point of view of the South, it did not eliminate the view of the North
Nice.
because the balance is essential if we're ever going to reach the time of the Mashiach. And
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
just sort of want to
Whoa,
leave
whoa, okay, okay. Hold on.
that
Before you
there.
throw the Messiah into this, let me just say, Harriet, thank you. Very profound question. Here's what I think. We're talking about history here. We're talking about politics. We're talking about religious history. We're talking about the Bible, but we're talking about the human experience. The kingdom of South and the kingdom of North exist within each one of us. The part of me that wants it familiar, that wants it central, that's all about me is alive and strong. That's my ego. And there's another part of me that's a little more expansive, that's a little more liberal, that sees more than my immediate needs, right? Whichever part of my personality that is, maybe my collective unconscious. So, for sure, this is a story about Jewish history, about the lesser known, origin story of our becoming a people with split personality, but it's also about humanity. And it's also about the fact that in our tradition, there is a sense of the good inclination and the bad inclination. The part of me that's going to go eat chocolate at midnight, even though I know it's going to destroy my gut, and the part of me that knows better. The part of me that chooses love and justice, and the part of me that chooses greed and injustice in my own life, in our own lives, and in Jewish history. So I think you're right that whoever wrote this text and whoever gave us this tradition, knowingly and unknowingly, is not only echoing what may have happened in our history, how we were born divided, but how throughout history and human history and Jewish history, there is a dance between binaries, between different forces, between different tendencies, between this and that, or or, and we're maybe asked in a prophetic, redemptive way to go towards the both and. That is where I want to go with this course. We're not there yet. We're still focusing on the divisive, but the goal is to figure out what is the middle, what is the common ground. How do we find place in the in between, despite deep differences, whether they're within us or in the world? So thank you for taking it to this deeper level. This is definitely a discussion not only about history, but about mythology and the human ability to acknowledge the polarity and somehow find a place of union within. Thank you. Great question. Daniel, my brother, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for today. I guess I have a question that's kind of about the biblical writing piece of things. And I guess I'm curious just in terms of the implications of the Bible really being put down then. It's sort of a preceding question just in terms of how that wisdom was being held both in the North and the South before it was put on the page and what I guess I'm particularly interested in terms of, the the kingdom of Israel, how that wisdom was being held there and what the process of kind of assimilating to this central canonical
Yeah,
text looked like.
great. Yeah, great question. Here's what we know, and we're going to get to this again throughout the year. We assume that in the North there was a body of wisdom. There were texts, or at least stories. There was a rich tradition of the North. We know that, for instance, in the North, um, Jacob is a very important character. He's the father of most of the tribes, and Rachel is the mother of the North. She's the mother of Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh. We know that they had different stories about divinity. They had a story about the Exodus from Egypt, which is how they ended up in that part of Canaan. Somehow those stories migrated to the south after the destruction of Assyria because they begin showing up in the way the south tells its stories. The south isn't interested originally in Jacob. They're interested in Abraham. He's in Hebron, he's in the south. The original southern narrative, according to scholars, had no Exodus. Abraham migrated. There was no Exodus. Later on, those northern southern narratives begin to be fused into the single narrative we now call the Bible. And there is a fascinating body of knowledge trying to understand that. So while we don't know exactly what the northern traditions held, we know they had their own lore. We know they had their own, I wouldn't call it Bible, but mythology. And some of it was lost, but some of it became integrated in what would become the Bible, authored by the South, by the Judah. And it's a lot of scholarship that's helping us pick together what is it according to different gods' names, Yahweh, Elohim, the priority of different characters, the et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great question. Jacob Wright in his book writes a lot about that. And we're going to come more to this question of the northern and the southern religious mythology the more we go deeper into the course. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Daniel. Roxanne and Ken, I'm going to come to you next. You are muted, my dear.
My question has to do with, I don't know. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It seems that the split came between Jeroboam and Rehoboam, that it was, maybe I'm being too literal, but the way you brought the history to us, that it was more political and economic than religious or spiritual or anything else. That it was the factual, the taxation issue and the slavery issue that were more prominent than the fact that Solomon was corrupt.
Correct. Who's telling the story?
The
Whose
South.
agenda is it, right? Exactly. And is the South going to say that we lost the kingdom because we were religiously corrupt? No. The South is going to tell the story that our king messed up because he wanted more power than he should have. Got to blame someone. Now, whatever happened, we don't exactly know. I personally think it makes much more sense that it was a financial political schism, that the people of the North, who were the majority, did not want one small tribe overseeing them religiously, politically, financially, etc. Fact is, we don't know. So I like the fact that you're pointing out the discrepancy between the text we read in Kings, where it is this prophet who says, I'm going to cut the kingdom into two because of religious lawlessness. And then just a couple of chapters later, that isn't even mentioned. The issue is taxation. So which is it? Right? This is when you begin thinking that someone is responsible for the official agenda, for the official propaganda, for the official text. But there are other traditions too, right? So the Bible was and wasn't edited as a very cohesive text. It is a collective of different fragments, not always as tightly edited as you would have think. So you're absolutely right that there are different reasons for why the kingdom may have split. And And by the way, it may not have split. There may never have been a United Kingdom. That is one of the more audacious scholarship opinions that there was always the North, there was always the South. David was the king of the South, his tribe and a half. He was never the king of the whole thing. That is Judean manipulation of history. And so they're telling us this whole story about the scorpions and the thing. No, nonsense. The North at some point was like, we got nothing to do with you. We're going to be here. We're going to be there. So the fact is, we don't know. We're dealing with what we got. And I like that you are picking up the different narratives here, because that's letting us know that there is more here than meets the eye. Always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken.
Thanks, Reb Amichai. So
Yeah.
getting back to Daniel's question, he was perfectly positioned because I'm interested in the historical and from a literary perspective of the canonization redaction of the Tanakh, the reason why, Davka, precisely the northern narratives aren't reflected in our sources that we have now, is that because by the time the 10 tribes were exiled or disappeared, they didn't have a chance to assemble their side of the story. And by the time that the Bible was starting to be redacted and put together as a whole, there weren't writers from the North who could contribute their side of the story.
So we don't know. That's a good assumption. What we assume, and I'll send you to look at some of the articles that are in the resources section of the landing page, and some of the authors who are really focusing on this. What we assume is that the 10 tribes did not get lost in Afghanistan and Vietnam and across the rivers of the Dark Ages. No, most of the 10 tribes simply migrated south to Judah. And we know that from archaeological findings that the real estate boom in Judah and the Jerusalem environs following the destruction of Samaria by the Assyrians is like unbelievable. Most of them just moved to the south, and they moved with whatever they had left, and they moved with their stories. They moved with their narratives. Also, it's important to say that writing doesn't happen on mass scale until the 6th and 5th century. So a lot of it is oral tradition. And the scribes may have brought fragments of writing, but they mostly brought stories. And at some point, the scribes of the north, those who remained, join the scribes of the south in the Davidic court in Jerusalem, and they begin to create the united narrative of different traditions. And out of that, eventually, by the time the Babylonians exile the Judeans, and as a response to that trauma, the book gets actually written. It includes both northern narratives and southern narratives. It includes the name of God as Yahweh from the south and Elohim from the north. It includes Moses and Joshua and Jacob and Abraham and Isaac. In fact, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob become a family. They may not have been a family before that. Rachel and Leah suddenly become sisters, not just goddess deities of two different parts of the land. So the construction, the genius construction of the Torah and the Bible as we know it, is a product of looking at these different narratives and creating one. Right?
Yeah.
And again, we are living in the 21st century. Think about the narratives told in the American story about, you name it, Thanksgiving, right? Or whatever time we'll tell about our own turbulent happenings. Cultures have a way of assimilating different strands and creating one consistent narrative, and then we come and find the cracks.
Right.
That's likely what happened here. Likely. Right? Super rich. And we're going to go deeper down that rabbit hole as this course continues. Thank you, Ken.
Great.
Aura, you get the final question of the evening before we wrap up.
Oh, so nice. Thank you. So I'm not sure, it's sort of going to be a question slash comment, and I'm very curious to hear you respond. I'm struck that, so we were just in Parshat Truma this past week, and And I was struck yesterday by a line that we encountered. It's Exodus 25:20. It's talking about the Kruvim on top of the ark, and it says, Ufneim ish el achiv, trying to describe the way these two angels are facing each other. Literally, the word ish means man, el achiv, toward his
His
brother.
brother. Right.
And I wonder if there's a hint here between two kingdoms. I'm also like, I remember when you addressed our group 2 months ago now, you did pick up on something I've long wondered about, which is the criticality of brothers as a motif throughout the 5 books of Torah. And I kind of wonder, is that also a hint? I'll say 2 more things and then I'll be curious to hear you respond. Yesterday's Haftorah talks about Solomon ordering the building of the temple and describes how he imposed mas, this hard labor on the people. It's the same word used by Pharaoh during, during the period of slavery. Torah uses the same word. So a rabbi sort of commented yesterday, like, what's with this word and why is it here? And it was just an interesting thing. And my final question is like, and maybe this is like beyond the scope, but is Torah in any way in describing this Mishkan, this place in the wilderness where, you know, the ideal is sculpted into these angels, each facing his brother, putting holy words. Is it trying to forge unity through a spiritual slash religious plane where politically and economically it's very clear that things were broken? That's my question. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So, Aura, thank you for being erudite and holding many complex connections. Look, the story of the cherubim, the Holy of Holies, whether myth or history, whether Jerusalem history projected onto, desert history, is about the fact that the heart of the matter, or the core of the Jewish existence, is intimacy. Is these two creatures looking each other face to face, eye to eye, as we ought to, and in the middle of that place, in the gaze of the sacred, is where the divine lives. The divine lives where we see each other, where we meet each other's eye. That is the beautiful image of our sacred center. Now, whether that existed for real or depicted later, goddess knows. But it's important to remember that the Jerusalem story is about a temple where these two cherubim, two griffins, angels, exist, and Yahweh, or the Shekhinah, the divine, dwells above them, in between them. That's the south. Meanwhile, in the north, the exact same thing in the temples of Samaria and Bedan. There's one temple in Jerusalem, there's multiple temples in the north because God is everywhere, but there's always a golden calf, and God is sitting on top of the golden calf. So the north has a secret magic animal on top of which the divine lives. The south has a magic animal on top of which God lives. It's not about the animals, golden calf or cherubim. It's about the finger that points at the moon, right? These magic animals are just the carriers of the sacred. So I don't know if the text in Exodus about one brother looking the other in the eye, or one sibling into its other sibling's face, is hinting at the civil war or the civic tension between the two tribal entities. It could be, but in the very least, it is a constant yearning for getting beyond our differences and seeing each other eye to eye. I'm being more mystical and Kabbalistic than practical and historical, but that's where I want to go. And so you are right that the resonance of the text about Solomon and taxation echoes the hard hand of the Pharaoh upon the people, and that whoever edited these scriptural texts wanted us to understand the layers, wanted us to understand that authority and authoritarianism, the tyranny, can show up in many ways, including King Solomon or many later kings after, and that it's on us, I would say, to talk truth to power, to resist this kind of tyranny and mass labor and taxation, and to say, no, no, no. We're not going to play this game. We want something else, which is the history we just saw here today, right? The North rightfully says we don't want to be part of this machine of authoritarianism for the sake of building these gargantuan temples and palaces. No. So whether it happened in Egypt, whether it happened in Jerusalem, where it happened in the prophets or the kings, we're seeing the residues of the resistance to this kind of centralized power that will never lead to where we want to go, right? It's leading us to the hardship and the heartache that we are living with right now. I'm not going to get political about Bibi and thing, whatever, but like clearly we're seeing echoes of these political ideologies at play. Um, I can answer more, but I won't. I'm running out of time. Forgive me, Evelyn. I will not be able to take your question. I am joining another Zoom in about 7 minutes, which is about Jewish witches and preparing for Purim. If anybody wants to join that particular class, I don't know where the link is to that Zoom, but that's my next session for this evening. It's an interesting circle. And I'm inviting you all to take a deep breath with me. If you do want to, anyway, I don't know where to find the Zoom link for this witch circle. I'm going to find it in a minute. But whether you're watching with me right now or watching later, thank you for being part of session number 2. How the kingdom split, maybe. When we continue next month, we'll go deeper into the riddle of what this has to do with our own lives, internally, collectively, personally, publicly. How does this ancient schism reflect on today's ideological gaps? And how can we find a place between the gaze of the cherubim to find common ground and get beyond discord to respectful difference? With that, my friends, I wish you a good night. For those of you who will be celebrating Purim next week, may it be joyful and respectful, upside down from the horror of right now, and whatever other holy days and nights ahead of you, may they be blessed with kindness. Be in touch with questions, with comments. I will see you online again in a month, maybe sooner. Thank you and good night. Taylor, thank you for holding us, and we'll continue as soon as we can. Laila Tov, good night.